Okay. I guess get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Mike Monzone. I am the outgoing Director of Outreach and External Affairs for the Graduate Entomology Student Association. And as one of our last events for the season, we kind of wanted to take a look at the possibilities for life after a student leaves the graduate program. So we brought three fabulous Rutgers alumni in to talk about their career. And so I have some questions prepared, and we'll hopefully foster some discussion between the panelists. And so first I'll introduce everyone, and then I guess we can get started. So from UC Riverside, we have Dr. Monique Rivera. At Brigham Young University, we have Dr. Paul Franson. And from Arizona State University, we have Dr. Lauren Widener. So thank you so much for joining us. If any of you want to say anything before we get started, please feel free to introduce yourselves or say anything you want to say first. That's fine. We'll just get started. So the first question that I have, that I was hoping everybody would give an answer to, was if you envisioned yourself where you are now, and why or why not.
So do we want to establish like a question answering order maybe?
So what I was going to try to do is go like, I actually didn't with this one, but then I just have like an initial next to each. I was going to throw out each question to like a person, and then hopefully everybody would chime in afterwards. But if you don't have anything to say about that particular question, if you wanted to wait for another one, I don't want anyone to feel behooved to answer every single question.
Well,
Dr. Rivera, would you like to start off with
yeah, I'm the only one unmuted. I see you guys sitting on mute. I see you. Anyway, so yes, actually, to some degree, this was the original type of position that I wanted back when I was an undergrad. And, what I will say, though, is a PhD will make you give up hope, because I think around my third or fourth year, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do whatever. Okay, because this just doesn't seem like something that's going to be completely possible. Just because you just get tired and you get stressed out and you just feel like you lose sight of your dream, essentially. And so that's kind of my advice, is that, yes, I envision myself here, but there were times when I felt like maybe this wasn't possible.
I just have one question before we go on. Would you guys mind just doing like a quick snippet of what you guys do? So like, Monique, I know you are the extension specialist, but I'm not sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's actually
Paul and Lauren also do. So I think that'd be really helpful, especially.
Yeah, sorry. I was trying to articulate that before and did a very poor job. So to be able to really quickly tell us in your own words what it is you do, your title and what you do on a daily basis.
And I think we should go in order of Monique, Lauren, and Paul.
Sure, sounds perfect.
Good job, Kasha.
Yeah, I'm the organizer.
This is why we need
people decide things, and I'm like, no, I'll decide for you.
Thank you. Yeah, this is why we have Kasha here all the time for everything, is because whenever we are not living up to it, Kasha always brings us there. So, Dr. Rivera, would you like to start?
Okay, so I'm a cooperative extension specialist. This is kind of different in the UC than it is anywhere else. I have no direct teaching responsibility. So my lab, I find the percentages sort of ironic because you're expected to do 100% of two of any three things usually. And for me, that is 100% research and 100% extension. So that means that I run a full research program, and then I also run, in addition, my extension program.
So as Mike said earlier, I'm Lauren Widener. I'm an assistant professor of forensic science at Arizona State University. I'm also the forensic science program lead, the director. We switched terms recently, so lead as if it's an undergrad program. And I'm also a board certified forensic entomologist. I don't know if you wanted us to all explain who we were and then go back to answer the question, or explain who we are and then answer the question.
Why don't you just answer the question? Okay.
So when I was a grad student, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. So I can't say that I expected to be out here at all. I definitely didn't expect to be in Arizona. I had never been to Arizona like prior to interviewing for this job. I apologize if you can hear my dogs. So I knew I wanted to teach. I did a TA-ship when I was at Rutgers and I loved teaching. So I knew that I wanted to do something with teaching. So my split here is 40-40-20. So 40% teaching, 40% research, 20% service. And that equates to, I teach 2 classes a semester.
Great.
Okay, yeah, so I'm an assistant professor. I'm on a 50-50 10 appointment, so that's 110%, not as much as Monique's, which is 200%, but where 50% research, 50% teaching, and 10% service. BYU is a little bit, it's an undergraduate focused university. We have a PhD program and a master's program. And so I am mentoring graduate students, but a big part of it is that they really encourage a lot of undergraduate engagement. So I have like 10 undergraduates working in my lab at any time. So I spent a lot of time trying to help undergraduates become researchers and to start to think about answering cool research questions and get the kind of experience that they need in order to reach the next step in life. And then I love research. And so I spend a lot of time with research, and I teach 2 classes in the fall and 1 class we call it the winter, but it's the spring for everybody else. I'm not sure why we call it winter semester, but it just ended. The semester that just ended here is the winter semester. I teach 1 class there, and then usually do research during the summer. What I envisioned when I started in the whole thing, I envisioned myself becoming a professor. That's what I wanted to do. But like Monique, my mind changed frequently while I was a PhD student, and then also it's my first job. So my first job was at the Smithsonian, and it was a permanent federal position, a good federal scientist position. So I'd be really happy to talk about that today too. And I thought I might never leave that, but then someone reached out to me about this job, and my wife really wanted to be back in the mountains, and so that's why we ended up back here. But I was really happy in my other job too. So once there, I thought, okay, federal research scientist is a sweet job. I'll just stay with that. But then now I'm a professor, which was the original plan, but really not intentional. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that be open to opportunities, because if you're too stuck on one particular path, it's maybe not going to be like the best idea. That's my personal advice. But
what does a federal researcher do? Is it the same thing as like research based at a university?
Yeah, it was a little bit different. So each federal agency has its own mission. And so in general, your research should be oriented towards the mission of that particular institution. At the Smithsonian, the mission is the increase in diffusion of knowledge. So it was super flexible. But if you're like at the USDA or something like that, which a lot of entomologists at the USDA, then it's a little bit more mission specific.
I like that a good theme of the first answer was, be open and, open to what could come. I think that's some good advice. So for our next question, Dr. Widener, do you want to start us off? Would you discuss your postgraduate school job application process and maybe give like some highlights or some things you wouldn't have done given the chance to do it over again?
So before coming to Arizona State, I was at Purdue University for 3 years, and I actually did a 6-month postdoc and then became a lecturer for the remaining 2.5 years. I actually applied for them almost simultaneously. But the postdoc is a little bit different. It wasn't a research postdoc, it was a teaching postdoc. So it was looking at basically how to improve courses. So our research really focused around working with STEM versus non-STEM students. How did they learn? I focused it around dichotomous keys, actually, for insects was one of my main focuses. So it was something I was not used to. Like I said, I really liked teaching, but I had no idea what was in store. We did a lot of like assessments and working with the courses that way. And just one of the things I think is really important, networking. I don't think people emphasize networking enough, because that is how I got my postdoc. I was at a conference talking to the person who was the director of that program, and they said, oh, we're going to be having a postdoc opening. I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. And then I saw them at another conference. We sat down, had a conversation, and they were like, well, that was your interview. So that worked really fortunate for me. My postgraduate experience was really good. It was really easy, and I feel like I should knock on wood, because I know that's not always the case. But I was also in a spot where my postdoc and first post-grad job were at the same location. I don't think I would have done anything differently, because I really enjoyed my time there and I really liked that job for the most part.
Does anyone else want to follow up with any post graduate school application experiences?
Mine was maybe a bit unusual, especially for someone in a professor position. I applied for a contract position with the Smithsonian while I was a PhD student still, and they had a big desire to get a program going at the Smithsonian, which I was going to be a part of. And so they hired me ABD, so I hadn't finished at Rutgers. And so I started my first job without having finished my dissertation yet. And it was kind of hard for personal reasons too. I mean, we had a two-week-old, so we moved with a 2-week-old. I started a new job and I had to write my dissertation. So that was a period of intense stress for me. But once that was over, it was really cool. But it was kind of I started off in kind of a service position where I was helping people analyze data and then spending a lot of time kind of building infrastructure for this genomics program that they were starting at the Smithsonian. But it went well enough that after a year, they hired me as a permanent federal employee. And so I think one thing that I will say too is that I don't think there's like a silver bullet for academic or government jobs. So I got really lucky because I learned some skills that were important at the time that I graduated. And now anyone who would graduate at the same sort of topic as me would have those skills. But at the time, I was just like a tiny bit in front of the wave. And so that's one piece of advice I would give. If you see emerging trends and you have an opportunity to pursue something that would be in that emerging trend, it's not a bad idea to take advantage of those opportunities, because, and that sounds a little too strategic. I know we're all scientists and want to be pure scientists and do it for the love of the science or whatever, but it doesn't hurt to be a little bit strategic. And it also doesn't hurt to understand that a lot of people have been in their positions because they're lucky, but luck favors the prepared, right? So you can be lucky too.
And how did you find your job?
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah. So, and this will differ across different fields, but I guess my field is what most people call EEB, so ecology and evolutionary biology. And there is a listserv called eValDeer that sends out job opportunities. So everyone in evolutionary biology posts their job opportunities to that listserv. And it was just a job that came through that listserv, and then I just applied for it cold. So being tuned in to where those jobs are posted is another important thing, especially because I started watching postdoctoral fellowships and jobs when I still had a couple of years left in my PhD. And by looking at those advertisements, you can kind of see emerging fields that you see people are being recruited for. And I think that was really important for me to be able to understand, observe these emerging fields and then cater my application to show the strengths in those places that were desired. But yeah, and it's changed a little bit now. I mean, email listservs are old school now, but social media is a good place to find it. Start following people in your field on Twitter, and you'll see a lot of job opportunities and postdoc opportunities posted there. Yeah, but I don't know if there's an equivalent, Monique and Lauren, in the other fields, but.
Well, I wanted to see if Dr. Rivera wanted to comment on where exactly you had found the job posting for your job, just because you had found exactly what you were looking for. And I think that that's would be interesting.
So part of that's just because I aimed and was aware and exposed to what that was really early on. So I was exposed to that as an undergrad. And so I found it on the NSOC job board. And that's, if I had a job in my lab or something like this, that's exactly where I would share it. I mean, so something so entomology specific, I would go right to the NSOC job board.
I was wondering if you could actually start us off with our next question. Every one of our panelists has traveled geographically pretty far from Rutgers, but I was wondering if you could talk about, the travel process. So, it was definitely worth it for you to move because it's exactly what you wanted to do. But, how is that the logistics of, moving for a job, moving so far away?
I think I'm a little bit of a, I guess, a hard ass person on this. And I think, I think that when you combine what Lauren said about networking and also what Paul has said, the idea is that the more you move and the more departments and people that you work with, the larger your network is. That's a really quick way to build a network. It's not like awkward conversations at a meeting. And so I think that there's, everybody has things that they want in where they live. I think sometimes in academia in particular, you can choose the job, but not the location. And so, I was as a postdoc in Florida in a town of, 30,000 people. And it's somewhere that I think most people would not want to live. But I have found that I've moved at every single stage in my career, and there's always something that you will find to enjoy. And I think being afraid to move, I think it's something you have to think about seriously if you want to do academia, because it's just part of the game, really, is what it seems to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo the same thing that Monique said. I'm a little unique in that now I'm 3 hours from where I grew up. So I'm going home for Mother's Day, right? So my job actually brought me closer to home, but graduate school, obviously I grew up in Idaho and I went to Rutgers, and then my first job was in Washington, DC. And I loved every place that I went. I mean, people in New Jersey thought it was super weird that I loved New Jersey so much, but I still love New Jersey a lot. And so what Monique said is just right. I mean, there's going to be pros and cons about every place. There's actually lots of cons, living close to home, right? So, in academia, you don't really get to choose, unfortunately. But that said, everywhere I've lived, I've loved. So I think a part of it is just finding the things that are cool about a place, and then really going in on those things. You can ride your bike anywhere in basically any city. So finding a hobby that you can do anywhere really helps, and that definitely helps me. So
I'm in the complete opposite situation as Paul. I'm a New York native. So I have moved almost as far as I can the other direction. My family's not the biggest fan of that, but I actually love it out here, and I loved Indiana, and I loved everywhere I've been. And I think kind of what Paul said, right? Like, you find something that you like in that area. I think one of the things that I shouldn't say nobody talks about, but we don't talk about it enough, is you're very nomadic in academia, right? So you go and you get your PhD and you spend 5 years with people that become your friends, and then everyone is successful and everyone leaves. Everyone goes to a different spot in the country. But that's what makes conferences so fun, right? We get to see everyone again. But it's just kind of trying to stay in an area, I think, is very hindering for a lot of people. And I feel like people will lose out on a lot of opportunities that way. So I definitely think traveling. And, you know, it can be scary. I moved out to Arizona by myself and I didn't know a single person. Paul was probably the closest person I knew. He was stayed away. But it's amazing. And I absolutely love it out here.
Great. I like that answer was like pretty consistent across the board. Dr. Widener, can you start us off with our next question? So what skills that you learned in your graduate career were most important or were able to translate best to your job, to your role right now that you are in?
So I think there's several things there. So the TA-ship, like I said, that teaching was a large component of my postdoc, and it's obviously a large component of what I do now. So teaching was really great. But also, so the research, when I was at Rutgers, there wasn't any other forensic entomology people there. So Dr. Hamilton was great to take me on with the unknowns. But I learned a lot of my method, like my methodology and my protocols that we kind of developed there. It's what I do now with my students here. Literally the exact same trap I used in my PhD is the trap that we are using out here. And it's very cost effective and very easy to use. Pretty much every protocol or methodology that I kind of developed or worked on while I was at Rutgers, we implement out here now. So those research skills, I was in a greenhouse to the side by myself. I know some buildings have kind of moved around and changed a bit. But just kind of all of that and the adaptation. Granted, now I don't have to deal with winters like I did in Jersey, which is nice. However, the summers here are dreadful. But I would say just kind of the troubleshooting, that experience that you learn there and trying to work with what you've got, you carry those skills, I mean, all the way through, in my opinion, at least.
Does anybody want to follow up? Dr. Rivera, Dr. Francis, do you have a comment on that?
I always have comments, but I don't know.
They're always welcome. They are.
So the biggest thing that helped me get jobs out of graduate school was learning how to code. So I, like my first job was just basically because I had written some software that some people knew about. And so analytical skills were really important, especially for my first job. But then now I don't get to code very often anymore. When people say that, you know, they become professor and only work on research, like their own research for a very small portion of the time, that's actually true. It was hard for me to believe when I was a graduate student, but it's basically after my kids go to bed at night that I basically have time to code or do analysis. So that was really big. So if there's some sort of analog, I mean, coding works well for every different field, in my opinion, but if there's some sort of analog, it's okay to pick up skills that you know you can use outside of your career. And I was really stressed out. I mean, I had a supervisor who told me very straightforwardly that about the job situation in academics. And so I knew I wanted to pick up skills that could translate into other things. And so that's another thing that I would think about doing, is picking up some sort of skill like that you could translate into an industry job if necessary. But other than that, time management skills, I learned a lot in my PhD about how long it takes me to do a particular thing, or how to prioritize stuff. And I'm still really super bad at it, but I'm better at it than I was when I entered. So I'm slowly getting better. And then just reading quickly, reading papers really quickly, reading things quickly for comprehension. I remember just struggling as a graduate student, spending a whole day on a paper and trying to understand what they were doing. But partly it's just that I've understand the field better, but partly I've really kind of figured out better how to ingest information. And then also writing efficiently is really important. So learning how to write quickly and concisely. The more practice you get writing, the better. And that'll be reflected in your cover letter, your application materials, and then the currency of academia, which is publications and grant proposals, right?
So I think that what I would say is that my more formative years for the current job skills that I use are the postdoc. So for me, the PhD was more getting legs and sort of really where you become a true scientist. You really manage your own project, and you're juggling a bunch of things. They're just different things than you do when you get say a faculty position. So I feel like there's not enough emphasis on how important a postdoc is. A postdoc is where you learn how to essentially, I call it almost like cooking. Like you have multiple things on the stove and they have to like come off at a certain frequency, turn them into papers. And so you learn more how to, or I learned more how to manage multiple projects and very different projects as a postdoc. And that is a skill that I use a lot more than anything that I would specifically say from the PhD. I feel like I just grew really as a person during the PhD and as a scientist.
Actually, so Dr. Rivera, the next question is actually for you specifically. And so working in such a, in agricultural entomology so closely, you know, like, well, outside a lot of times, what can you say about the impact of climate change or wildfires having on your job and the way you have to do your job out in the field?
I mean, California is weird. That's what I'll say to start, because, you know, the wildfires are a really huge problem. How it affects my work is just, you know, pure air quality. There's certain days where you really shouldn't be outside. You really shouldn't be doing field work. In terms of climate change, you know, I think since I've been out here, the thing that I've really had to learn about is water, believe it or not. I think that on the East Coast, well, the East Coast just looks like a rainforest at this point, I mean, compared to California. So just learning how those water requirements influence not just the growth of the plant, but I do a lot of work with the state of California for regulatory purposes, and that really drives a lot of political movement, and also regulations and the cost of water in each township can really play a role in how people that are trying to gain their livelihood through agriculture, how they engage in agriculture is really driven by that, and if there's even agriculture in that area. So that would be the big difference, and I think that a lot of that water stuff is really directly related, very likely, to climate change, because we have periods of drought and then periods where there's not a drought, but this year is a drought year, and I would expect it to be also a really bad wildfire year because we haven't had almost any water. So that's all I would say. Mostly more deeper inside baseball on the politics behind agriculture for water and climate change, and then for wildfires, it's just there's certain days where you really just shouldn't be outside breathing the air.
Great, thank you. Dr. Widener, can you answer this question specifically for you next? And so you are an entomologist that has stepped into the role of leading a forensic science program. And so can you talk about, you know, being in that role and transitioning into a title that may not be, you know, necessarily consistent with, you know, what your degree is in?
Sure. So that's actually something that I wanted to comment on, right? So when we talk about forensic entomology, there's a very heavy forensic side for what I do. So my undergrad was in forensic science, and then I have this entomology, which is what my grad school was in. So it's this very interesting balance, because a lot of the forensics work, right? I only work with bugs on dead things for the most part. So all of the other aspects of it, it is very interesting, because like my research pertains to those insects. So we actually just started doing insect biodiversity work with national parks down here, which has nothing to do with forensics, but that entomology part in my title makes me able to do that. So it's really about adapting what you're doing. So you don't always want to be just like this one mold, right? Like this is what you are, so you can only do one thing, because that will be very limiting as well. So actually, when I defended my PhD, I don't even remember my answer at the time. One of my committee members said to me, "Do you consider yourself a forensic scientist or an entomologist?" I think I said entomologist then. I think I would still say that now. But it's questions like that. And in my defense, he had me basically provide examples of where else I could do my research or how it could be applicable from an ecological point of view, decomposition ecology. So it is really important to have that kind of adaptability. And interestingly, the question that you actually asked, Monique, we had a wildfire come through one of our sites where we do our baited traps. Our traps weren't out and my research student was fine. But there's a lot of adapting that you have to do, whether it's the environment you're in, research questions. I have people come to me with the most bizarre research questions with insects sometimes, or forensics. So it really is just being as adaptable as you can. At least that's how I feel, especially fitting that kind of double role.
So next question is specifically for Dr. Franson. And you had mentioned before about being a little strategic about the skill set that you try to acquire, but specifically with molecular techniques and tools, that techniques are advancing, almost daily or weekly. So as you're trying to juggle the role of being a professor and a researcher, how do you maintain like a current skill set? Where are you looking to find out where the next big thing is?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it seems like by the time I finish a paper, it's like already out of date because the technology we use has changed so much within a year, and especially with molecular techniques and genomics in particular, it changes super fast. So it's hard to stay up to date, but it's one of the things, I guess I'm a little bit lucky because I'm kind of a huge nerd about all that stuff. So I'm really interested in the technological advances and in trying them out. One of the things that has been really important is to maintain good collaborations with other people who have skill sets that are a good supplement to your own. And so when new molecular techniques come out, I try to allocate a little bit of money towards generating data with those new molecular techniques and then learn how to analyze those data. And when you know how to analyze those data, it's easy to strike up new collaborations with people who are interested in collaborating in that way. So I've done that a little bit. We're lucky here that we have a DNA sequencing center in-house. And they're really proactive about trying out new molecular techniques. And so because of that, it's been really nice to have people that we can bounce ideas off. And I've just been somewhat lucky in that a lot of the time I can be a pilot tester. And so I can generate some data for free, which makes a big difference, obviously, but not everyone's going to have that opportunity. Stuff comes, in a lot of ways, I kind of like hate social media, but it's how I hear about new things a lot of the time. So Twitter is a good way to learn about new and emerging techniques. Following papers on bioRxiv, which is a preprint server where people will quickly post things about new technologies, is a good way to kind of evaluate pros and cons of particular techniques. So yeah, I guess but it does become harder all the time. I'm sure that in 20 years, it's going to be hard. I'm not going to be quite right on the cutting edge anymore, but I think that's just how it goes.
Well, I think, we can't always be on top of everything, especially in 20 years from now, right? I mean, who knows where Elon Musk will have brought us to Mars, I'm sure. So I was wondering if Dr. Rivera could start us off with our next question, which was, when you were making your transition from your postdoc or whatever last position you had into the current position you are in now, what were some of the largest unexpected differences that you found?
Oof, I'm sure Lauren and Paul have a lot to say about this as well. It's like Paul said, you don't do research, you sit behind a computer. I write grants, I manage grants, and I manage people. They don't teach you how to manage people. Grants, you might have some experience in graduate school and as a postdoc, but right now I manage about 15 people. So if you don't understand how to manage people, then that can be a huge time suck. And it can be an emotional time suck when things are going bad. So no one warned me about that. If having an employee go off the rails is absolutely one of the most detrimental things to your productivity that could possibly happen. And, you know, I think it's just a lot of paperwork. You're just constantly being asked, oh, sign this, do this. It's a nonstop stream of stuff that it is low priority when you think about things through the lens of research, or for me, extension, but it's high priority because you just have to do it. It's just something that you have to do. So your days might look like, you know, you might have 30% email, you might be able to like work on writing some sort of paper, some sort of other thing. And then, you know, it's really true that you just don't have time to read papers the way you did in graduate school or even as a postdoc. And that part is hard, but it makes conferences that much more important, and being able to see things live and people present things live. So that's what I would say. I mean, it's not for everybody, the final job. And so I would definitely encourage people to find someone that will be honest with you about what their days look like and what are the high points and what are the low points. And that'll be different for everybody. But that's going to be the best way to figure out if this is, you know, this path is the one that you really want.
I can continue that conversation. And I do have a lot to say about this, but I'll definitely keep it reeled in. And I won't even speak about like the main director job, but even outside of that, the politics behind how things work, I was not ready for. There are so many things when I kind of got out here and to see how things run, managing people, wanting to be in the lab doing research, but I can't because I need to do X, Y, and Z. I think I've got about 512 emails sitting in my inbox that I need to get to. Also, Dr. Hamilton, if I ever overused your gloves, I am so sorry. My undergrads go through gloves, like they grow on trees. And those expenses are just something that I didn't actually realize being a graduate student. So again, if I ever overuse anything, I am so sorry. But it's definitely managing people and trying. I think one of the main obstacles I've had is, right, people do things differently. So for any of you that know me, I do things kind of a set way, and that's how I work. But that doesn't mean that's how my students are going to work when they come in, or how they learn or process things. And I do spend a lot of times, I feel like most of my days I'm doing something related to a grant. So it's like teaching, grants, emails, the research that you want to get done. Like I just pop down into my lab sometimes just to get that, like living through them vicariously when I pop down there, because I do have a lab manager who pretty much runs my lab with my students. And I miss that for sure. We're actually going into the field next week and I can't wait because I haven't been in the field in a while. But there's definitely, it's different. It's not necessarily bad, but I agree with Monique that people don't necessarily tell you everything up front. I love what I do, so I still love my job, but it's definitely, I would like to be doing the research more. I have about 8 papers on my desktop that I have to read. Like I have a need to read section that I just haven't gotten to. So time management, as Paul had said earlier, is key. It's key with most things in life, but especially transitioning to this job where now I'm responsible for other people and their research and making sure everything is running smoothly, definitely plays a key role in that.
Yeah, I mean, here to what they, you know, both these really good scientists just said. It's and my kind of transition to the workforce also was a transition into family life. Like I have a couple kids now, and so there's all sorts of things that are more complicated than they used to be. But it is kind of amazing, like what students go through. And I was unprepared for what Monique kind of mentioned, which is the emotional toll that things take. Having to make sure to try and get wages for students, and then students will tell you all sorts of things going on in their lives, which is just totally overwhelming. And you want to help them, and sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So yeah, managing people, I think, has been the hardest part for me for sure. And then the politics, it varies from place to place, but every place has politics. I mean, at the Smithsonian, there was a lot of politics, a lot of ego, and there's kind of different types of politics here at BYU. And so, I mean, my suggestion for that to think of is to just not get involved in that. I just try to stay out of it. And that's been a pretty successful strategy. Although sometimes it does hurt you, because sometimes you get hurt if you don't stand up for yourself and people take advantage of you. But there's in Letters to a Young Scientist, this is this E.O. Wilson book. I don't know if you guys know about it. It talks about how to become a scientist. Some of the information in that book's outdated, but one of the things that he says that I think was really good advice, and I think about a lot, is that there are in professors and there are out professors. And in professors are really obsessed with the institution they're in and in gaining prestige and power in the institutions that they're working in. And then out professors are more interested in their wider field and their discipline and having an impact on their discipline. And not that I said that almost like it was a value judgment. E.O. Wilson said it less judgmentally, but I do think that I try to focus on the bigger picture rather than get caught up in little departmental politics and stuff like that, because you can just get exhausted if you worry about all of that stuff.
My next question was specifically for Dr. Rivera. So you work in a very geographically large agricultural state. You had mentioned, you briefly touched on the idea of like schedules and scheduling earlier. So could you talk about what it's like having to travel and service different areas of such a large geography, and how that impacts your work?
We're back to people management. So I have a lab that's based in the Central Valley, and I also have a technician that works in Ventura County, which is about 3.5 hours towards basically northwest of me. And then the lab that operates in the Central Valley is about 5 hours north of where I am. So I am a big fan of Slack and always have been since I started my lab. This is how I keep in contact with people and help build relationships. I also will say that I've now been working almost as much during a global pandemic as I did during normal times. And so it's kind of hard to gauge the travel thing now, because I haven't traveled in a really long time. And now everything's going digital. So there's benefits and there's negatives to that. And what I would say overall is that if you do have an interest in extension, nothing will probably ever replace building your initial relationships in person. I was very lucky to have my first year and a couple months during normal times. And so I was able to really build some strong relationships during that time, with a big sacrifice on my part, lots and lots of traveling. It was rare for me to be in my house for a solid 2 weeks. That's how much I was traveling. So I think that, it takes a certain personality. You kind of have to want to do that type of work and manage things from a distance, but it also really, building relationships with people. And what I mean by that is building relationships that you can trust that person, right? So my person that operates in the Central Valley runs her own set of staff and is somebody that I would really trust and don't worry about. So the better you can build relationships, the better you will be as a manager. And, like Paul and Lauren have said, like, this can be a huge time suck. It can be a great positive and very rewarding, but it can be just as negative when it goes poorly. So they don't talk to you about this in graduate school. You're not going to get that experience as a TA. You might manage some people, over the summer or short-term, undergraduates. It's not the same thing as when you have to be sitting in front of your computer and they have to be doing the work. So what my group does is, one, we make weekly schedules every week, and they're shared on Slack in a scheduling thread. And so my lead technician is responsible for that. He clears the schedule with me. It gets posted in that Slack channel. The second thing that happens that's kind of, let me think about that. So doing one-on-one meetings and not group meetings. I think this is really key. You will find out so much more from an individual person than you ever will from a group. Like I said, huge fan of Slack. And there was one other thing that I was going to mention. but it might come back to me in a second. I'll let Lauren and Paul have a stab at this one.
Yeah, so I mean, actually, come to think of it, the both of you are in pretty large states as well. So I mean, if you have any travel stories or travel advice, feel free to add that.
The only I don't have much. I mean, I have a couple travel stories. Something that Monique made me think of when we were talking about, you know, just things we've learned in this role or that you didn't learn. Choose your collaborators wisely. I got burned with some collaborators last year in the respect that I'm very detail oriented. I had my set deadlines and they were not meeting them, and they are friends of mine, and I wasn't sure how to handle that. So make sure that whoever you're going to collaborate with works either a similar way as you or as a similar pace as you, and values the work that you're doing as the same priority that you do. So that was kind of a side note that when Monique was talking, I remembered. And then as far as travel, Arizona is the largest state I've ever lived in. So when I was working with some of these national parks, I'd set up meetings with them and I'd say like, yeah, sure, that's fine. Not realizing it took me 4 hours because I had to cross half of the state to get there. When I was down in Oregon Pipe, my phone connected to a cell tower in Mexico. Like, I'm just not used to these type of locations. But that's one of the reasons I actually love it out here, the diversity in the land. But I'm definitely not used to my field sites being that far. I mean, I could make it to Southern Jersey in a couple hours. I'd like wrap up my whole Southern collections in a day and it was nothing. And here I need to plan way more than that. That's all I've really got to say about travel.
Before COVID, I was traveling probably way too much internationally. So that was maybe not the most productive thing to do, but I can't say no to trips that take me to cool places. So I've been at BYU. So before COVID, I'd been at BYU for 2 years, and I went to Nepal twice, Ecuador, Japan, Thailand, New Zealand, Australia, a couple other places too, I think, Panama. It maybe wasn't like the wisest. I think it hurt my productivity, and it totally hurt my health. But traveling around here, but since COVID, it's been really great. We started a big project just south of here where we're looking at the effects of wildfire on aquatic biodiversity using environmental DNA. And that's been really great. So I actually really like living in a spread out place because it also gives students a chance to, when you're working locally, it's hard to bring students to, never mind. It's hard to bring students on international trips sometimes unless you have dedicated funding for it. But giving students opportunities in your backyard, even if your backyard's really big, is possible. And so having overnight trips where they are collecting insects, I think it's super fun. I like it. But it is hard to schedule. And I don't know, it's probably that my supervisor Reckers never told me like the rules. Dr. Hamilton's still here, but like we just went everywhere. Like I don't remember ever getting permission or telling anyone that I was traveling or anything like that. But here it's like super, super tight. Like you have to have a travel authorization for everything. You can get blanket travel authorizations for within 100 miles, but anytime it's over 100 miles, you have to have a justification, have to have it paid for, and all this other sort of stuff. So I didn't realize how much work that is to get students to be able to go places. And especially during COVID. I mean, we've been continuing our field work, but we've had to take 2 cars because students can't ride together in the same car. And so it doubled costs. It's complicated, but you figure it out.
I remembered the other thing, and I think Lauren will like this because this is in alignment with Lauren stuff. We have an SOP for everything. And no project in my lab starts without an SOP, because what I found is that things get lost in translation, right? I can sit there and explain it and think I did a great job. And the person on the other side is like, yeah, that's how I thought you said it. But the SOP helps everybody know, and they can always refer back to it, and they don't feel like they're bothering me when they come to have questions. They know that we have this agreed upon document. So that's another way, you know, when you're working distance with people, to really make sure you guys are on the same page about what's going on and how data is being collected. So yeah, big fan of SOPs with a previous conversation and authorization from the PI.
Yeah, and the other thing is that maybe Lauren was talking about me or something in this last one, but yeah, don't take on too much too, because it's really easy to be unrealistic with what you think you can do. And so just like you should only take on collaborators who are invested. When you are the collaborator, make sure you try to be as realistic as possible in like, okay, this is what I can do by this time. And sometimes it's going to be a bummer because you're maybe not going to be able to do everything that they want, but that's so much better than promising to do something and then leave everybody high and dry, because that's what kind of sucks.
Paul, you were a great collaborator. I just want to put that out there.
And the SOP would be a great way to do it. I should start doing that because
I love them.
Yeah.
I knew it, Lauren. I knew it.
When my students come into the lab, we have an in-lab training and we read all of my SOPs together.
What is an SOP?
Standard operating procedure, just like a protocol for what you're doing.
Gotcha.
Another great binder to have. So actually, Dr. Weiner, my next question was for you specifically, and if you could talk about your interface between like yourself and working with the police and how that works with the university.
Sure. So I do forensic entomology trainings hosted through ASU for local law enforcement and forensic practitioners. And actually, everybody is really supportive of it. Having forensics in a title, everyone always seems to love that. We have had, I wouldn't say challenges with COVID, but like Paul had been saying, there's a lot more paperwork that you need to do, a lot more distancing, a lot more, how are you going to handle X, Y, and Z? But trainings are actually one of my favorite things that I do. They're exhausting. They're usually over 2 days, 2 full days. But it's really interesting. And I think it's something that you can add to any community. So if law enforcement was my community, but entomology, for example, and I never did extension or ag or anything like that, but I know you have your community of your farmers or whomever you're working with. So I find it really interesting being in the role that I am in and working with law enforcement, because they don't really usually have a background in insects. I wouldn't expect them to, right? They're law enforcement. So it creates another area of that adaptability that I was talking about a little bit before. So I have to be able to make sure that I can explain what I'm talking about to a level that they can understand. The first several slides that I have with them is, what is an insect, right? What makes an insect an insect? So it's very different than how I teach my forensic entomology class when we're going through doing all of this. But I think adaptability is really key when you're working with a group that you don't typically work with, or that they don't have the same background as you, because you have to make sure that you are relaying the information and kind of, as Monique said, that they're getting it for what you're saying and not how they're interpreting it. So adaptability, I just think is key, especially with teaching. It's, if you guys, or if any of you are TAs, or, you know, you have students that will get it right away. And then there are other students that's just not their learning style, and that's not how they're getting it. So you have to be able to kind of think about it in different ways, but it stems back to that for me.
I love that answer. So Dr. Franzen, you had mentioned working for the government before, being a government scientist. So I was wondering if you could maybe comment on that and just comment on the opportunities for molecular entomologists outside of academia.
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Being a professor.
Yeah, perfect. So the good thing about learning molecular techniques and increasingly computational techniques is that there are a lot of options out there. There are a lot of biotech companies. So a lot of the people that come from our program with an MS or even a BS end up at a biotech company working on data analytics or in a lab. In the government, there are a lot of opportunities in molecular biology, and they can be government-wide. And so the things that you might want to look at, and this is another secret about the government, frequently the government will hire its own postdocs. So if you're really interested in a government job, you should apply for postdocs to the government. So especially like USDA. And for molecular biology, you can just look up molecular biology on usajobs.gov. So usajobs.gov is where all of the federal jobs have to be posted, and they have to go through that. And just like I said with eValDeer and the NSOC job board, USA Jobs is a good place to start looking for things. So you can look for jobs. If you're in molecular biology, you can look for molecular biologist. That's an actual official title. But you can also look up bioinformatics or genomics. And a lot of those, any job that's a GS11 will likely be a postdoc job, which is actually a pretty sweet postdoc. It's a very well-paid postdoc. And one of the pieces of advice that I'll give you is that everything that they say in qualifications on the advertisement, you should copy exactly what it says and paste it into your CV for those things that you have, because they always go through pass at HR before it gets to actually the hiring manager. And so if you don't have the essential qualifications, you get thrown out early. You have to have your transcripts, including undergraduate and graduate transcripts uploaded, or else you get thrown out. So there's things like that that are important to think about. So the government jobs are sweet. And I loved my government job. There was a lot of bureaucracy. It was really hard to do certain things, but for the most part, it was flexible. And unlike what you might hear from politicians, I found that government workers were actually really interested in furthering the mission of their department and the agency that they worked in. There, you find a lot of passionate people who are civil servants because they want to do good. So that's one thing. And then biotech, if you just go to LinkedIn, I kind of hate LinkedIn. I don't really understand it, but I will say that I've had students really use that to their advantage and putting particular keywords. In fact, I had to take keywords out of my profile. Like when I was a data scientist, that was my official title at the Smithsonian. I got recruiters sending me emails like every day. Oh, you're a data scientist in the DC area. Can we talk? So that's actually good if you're looking for a job. It's annoying if you're not looking for a job. So keywords in LinkedIn, and that's basically how a lot of the people that I've known get jobs in industry work is having the right keywords and connecting with people through LinkedIn, which there's probably a million tutorials out there about how to effectively use LinkedIn. And I was skeptical, but it sounds like it's been really successful for my students. So it's not a bad thing to learn how to do, especially if you want a job outside of academia.
I love the specific details in that GS11. We'll all have to remember that. So I wanted to wrap this up with one last question. We'll start with Dr. Rivera, but so if you could just if you have one more piece of advice for someone leaving a program and entering the entomology work field, what would that piece of advice be?
It's not easy, and it's not supposed to be easy in a lot of ways. And it's normal to, like I said, waver on what you want to do. I think that the way I thought of it was that I would prepare myself for an academic position, and along the way pick up other things that may make me marketable to if things go tail up, essentially. And when I used to TA at Rutgers, I actually used to lecture my students about this, like you should have plan B, plan C, plan D. And I would even tell them, like, look, like if everything went bad, like I seriously would consider taking a job at Starbucks. Like you can't be above things, right? I think, just being ready for anything and thinking things through, all you can do on any given day is aim towards what you want and try your best. There is an element of luck to this, and you may be a perfectly qualified person and applying for academic jobs, and it just doesn't work out because like you're in a pool of applicants, and where you stand is really, it's like a group, right? So there's other people that might rise to the top just because there's something that you don't realize that they're looking for and you don't meet that need. So I think that the main thing is keep trying. Don't give up. I have a folder that has like 20 different files of job applications that were rejections. Most of them are postdocs. So I think, just keep at it. If it's something that you really want, just don't give up, and you will find where you're supposed to be.
I think that was really well said. So just kind of continuing what she was kind of saying there, one of the things that I think is don't sell yourself short. I have colleagues that didn't apply to a job because they didn't think they were going to get it. This current job that I have was the first faculty job I ever applied for, and I did it on the very last day I could have. I didn't think I was going to get it. I had never had a faculty job before, and I had several friends that were like, you should just apply. And I was like, but I'm not going to get it. What's the point of me applying? And I had one friend that said, well, even if you don't get it, you had your first round of practice of applying for a faculty job, so you know what it entails. Literally, I submitted it probably an hour before the deadline of the entire faculty application. Almost fell out of my seat when I got the whole, we'd like to bring you in for an interview. I could not believe it. I remember because I had to contact Dr. Hamilton for a reference. Dr. Transu, I don't know if he's still at Rutgers for the biology. That's who I was a TA under. But it was my first faculty job application ever. So, and I know that always doesn't happen, but I almost didn't apply because I didn't think I was qualified enough. I've definitely gone through 7 rounds of, or several, I won't say 7, imposter syndrome, being like, am I actually qualified for what I'm doing? Like, can I actually say this? And I have I was told that if you don't ever experience that, or if you are experiencing that, it means you're not an imposter and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're challenging yourself. But definitely, I think one of the things that Monique said was really great, like apply. And I would be willing to take any job. Sometimes you need not the job that you ultimately want to get your foot in the door, right? Because when you do submit that CV or your cover letter, and as Paul had mentioned, I was told that because I applied for a federal job in DC, obviously didn't get it, but they told me HR will look at it, look for those keywords, and if you don't have it, you don't even make it past that. So a lot of times, right, when you're applying, it's how good you look on paper. And sometimes people might not reflect very well on paper, but can be amazing off of paper. So don't ever sell yourself short and just apply. You never know. Even if you don't think you're going to get it, like I did, apply anyway. That's my words of advice.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know why I'm here saying everything good, but yeah, definitely apply for things. And it hurts a little bit when you get rejected. Like no one likes to be rejected, but you just got to realize that that's the norm. And there's lots of things that are out of your control. They might be looking for one specific thing. They might already have an internal candidate. You never know. Like when I applied for that Smithsonian job, I thought it was the biggest long shot in the world. And then I got it. It was like, I couldn't believe it. And if I hadn't applied, then you don't get it right. Was it, I don't know. Is it Wayne Gretzky? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, or maybe that's Michael Jordan. I don't know. One of the, but yeah, but then, so it's kind of like this, be confident enough to apply, but don't get too offended by rejection because it happens. And the other thing, being on the other side, I write a ton of letters of recommendation and it does take like a ton of time, but I'm always happy to do it. So never like, I was really hesitant to apply for some jobs just because I didn't want to bug my letter writers. So there are jobs that required a letter up front. I wouldn't apply because I was too scared, but now being on the other side, just do it. And hopefully they'll, someone helped them at one point, they're going to help you. So don't be as shy as I was in that regard. I don't think. Yeah, I mean, I guess that basically, is there anything else I was supposed to say with that particular thing?
No, I think that was, I think all of the responses to that question and all of the questions were really well said and thoughtful. And I think there's a lot of practical advice that not only people in this department, but a lot of graduate students could use to help, shape their path or, be confident that, they are where they're supposed to be. So thank you very much to our 3 panelists. Very appreciative that you were able to come in, and thank you very much to the Department of Entomology for allowing us to have this great event today. So If anybody has anything else they'd like to say before we leave, thank you very much. Oh, also, if anyone here is interested, there is our local chapter of SACNAS is hosting a event tonight at 5 p.m. With an NYU researcher. So if anybody's interested in that, meeting ID is down there, but if you need the link, feel free to message me or email me, and I can get that for you, no problem. So that's going to be a good one. So feel free to join that as well. So thank you again to all of our panelists, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. And we're all proud RU graduates.